Emily was just an ordinary teenager until the night she felt something watching her in the dark. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but as the days turned into weeks, she realized something far more sinister was happening. This is the true story of a girl who became the target of a malevolent spirit, a spirit that didn't just want to haunt her, it wanted to possess her. The story begins with Emily, a 17-year-old high school student living in a quiet suburban town. She's described as shy, introverted, and someone who keeps to herself. One night, as she's lying in bed, she feels an odd presence in her room. The air grows cold, and she hears faint whispers. She brushes it off as stress or lack of sleep. But the next morning, she wakes up with strange bruises on her arms. Bruises she can't explain. Over the next few nights, the presence grows stronger. Emily starts to feel like she's being watched, even when she's alone. She begins to hear footsteps in the hallway outside her room, and one night, she sees a shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed. Terrified, she tries to scream, but no sound comes out. The figure leans closer and she feels an icy hand brush against her cheek before it vanishes. The spirit's visits become more frequent and more invasive. Emily starts to feel its presence during the day, too. A cold breath on the back of her neck, a hand brushing against her leg when she's sitting alone. She begins to have vivid, disturbing dreams where the spirit appears to her, whispering things she can't quite understand. In one dream, it tells her, "You're mine now." Emily's health begins to deteriorate. She loses weight, her grades drop, and she becomes increasingly isolated. Her parents notice the changes but chalk it up to teenage stress. Meanwhile, the spirit's obsession grows darker. It starts to touch her in her sleep, leaving behind marks and bruises. Emily wakes up one morning to find deep scratches on her back, as if someone or something had clawed at her in the night. The spirit's behavior becomes more aggressive. It no longer hides in the shadows. It appears to Emily in broad daylight, its face twisted into a grotesque smile. It begins to speak to her, its voice a low, guttural growl. It tells her it's been watching her for a long time, that it's chosen her because she's pure. Emily tries to fight back, but the spirit's power is overwhelming. It begins to control her actions, forcing her to do things she would never do, like harming herself or lashing out at her family. One night, Emily's parents hear her screaming. They rush to her room to find her standing in the corner, her eyes blank and her body trembling. She speaks in a voice that isn't hers, saying, "She belongs to me now." Her parents are horrified, but don't know what to do. They take her to doctors, therapists, and even a priest, but nothing helps. The spirit's grip on Emily only tightens. Emily's life spirals out of control. The spirit begins to appear to her friends, terrifying them into staying away. It starts to manipulate her thoughts, making her believe she's losing her mind. One night, Emily wakes up in the middle of the night to find herself standing in the kitchen holding a knife. The spirit's voice echoes in her head, urging her to end it all. She fights back, dropping the knife and collapsing to the floor in tears. Desperate for help, Emily's family turns to a paranormal investigator. The investigator discovers that the spirit is not just a random entity, it's the ghost of a man who died decades ago, a man who was obsessed with young girls in life and continues to prey on them in death. He explains that the spirit is drawn to Emily's innocence and vulnerability, and that it won't stop until it has completely consumed her. The final confrontation begins with Emily and her family preparing for the ritual. The paranormal investigator, a seasoned man named Victor, arrives with an arsenal of tools: holy water, sage, candles, and ancient relics. He explains that the spirit is not just any ghost. It's the restless soul of a man who, in life, was a predator obsessed with young girls. His death did nothing to quell his dark desires. Instead, it amplified them, allowing him to haunt and torment the living. Victor warns that the spirit will fight back with everything it has, and Emily must be strong if they are to banish it for good. As the ritual begins, the atmosphere in the house shifts dramatically. The air grows thick and heavy, and the temperature drops so low that their breath becomes visible. The candles flicker wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Emily sits in the center of the room, her body trembling as Victor chants in a low, steady voice. The spirit's presence becomes palpable, a suffocating weight pressing down on everyone in the room. Suddenly, the lights go out, plunging the room into darkness. The candles are extinguished, and the only sound is the frantic beating of hearts. Then, a low, guttural growl fills the air, sending chills down their spines. Emily feels a cold hand grip her shoulder, and she screams, her voice echoing through the house. Victor shouts for her to stay strong, but the spirit's voice drowns out his words. "You can't escape me," it hisses, its voice a twisted blend of malice and desire. "You're mine. You've always been mine." The room erupts into chaos. Furniture is thrown across the room, windows shatter, and the walls seem to close in. Emily's family huddles together in fear, but Victor remains steadfast, continuing the ritual despite the spirit's attempts to stop him. Emily, however, is caught in a battle for her very soul. The spirit's presence invades her mind, flooding her with images of its past victims, young girls like her, their faces frozen in terror. It whispers to her, promising that she will join them, that she will never be free. But something inside Emily snaps. She's tired of being afraid, tired of being a victim. Summoning every ounce of strength she has left, she screams at the spirit to leave her alone. Her voice is raw and powerful, filled with a defiance that surprises even her. For a moment, the room falls silent. The spirit's grip on her loosens, and she feels a surge of hope. Victor seizes the opportunity, chanting louder and more urgently. He sprinkles holy water around the room, and the spirit recoils, its form flickering like a dying flame. Emily joins him, her voice trembling but determined as she repeats the words of the ritual. The spirit lets out a deafening roar, its form twisting and writhing as it fights to maintain its hold on the mortal world. But it's no use. The combined strength of Emily's will and Victor's expertise proves too much for the spirit. With one final ear-splitting scream, it is banished, its form dissolving into nothingness. The room falls silent, the oppressive weight lifting as quickly as it had descended. Emily collapses to the floor, tears streaming down her face as her family rushes to her side. Victor warns them that the spirit may not be gone forever. Spirits like this one are relentless, and it may try to return. But for now, Emily is safe. As the family begins to clean up the wreckage, Emily feels a sense of relief she hasn't known in months. She's exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but for the first time in a long time, she feels like herself again.
Lillian Harper was the kind of girl everyone noticed. With porcelain skin, emerald green eyes, and cascading auburn hair, she was the undisputed queen of her high school. Boys worshipped her, girls envied her, and teachers adored her. But then, she changed. Within months, the girl who once radiated beauty and confidence became something else entirely. Her skin grew pale and cracked, her eyes sunken and lifeless. She spoke in whispers that weren't her own, and at night screams echoed from her house. Some said it was stress, others thought it was drugs. But the truth was far darker. Lillian wasn't alone in her own body anymore. She had become the vessel for 3 unspeakable horrors. Lillian's descent into darkness began subtly. She started losing weight, her appetite vanishing overnight. She complained about strange dreams, visions of a woman in black, standing at the foot of her bed, whispering things in a language she didn't understand. Then came the voices. At first, they were distant murmurs, like static in the back of her mind. But soon, They grew louder, clearer. They called her name, mocked her, laughed at her fear. Then came the physical changes. Lillian's once flawless skin became dry and cracked, as if something inside her was draining the life from her. Her beautiful eyes lost their luster, replaced by dark circles and a glassy, vacant stare. Friends noticed the shift, but Lillian brushed off their concerns. "I'm just tired," she'd say. But she knew the truth. Something was taking hold of her. One night, her mother found her standing in front of the bathroom mirror, nails digging into her own face, whispering over and over, "They're here. They're inside me." Lillian's condition worsened. She began to have blackouts, waking up in places she didn't remember going to. Her voice changed, shifting between three distinct tones, one soft and sorrowful, another guttural and enraged, and the last, inhuman. The first spirit was a woman, a tortured soul who wept through Lillian, crying for a lost child. She spoke in riddles, warning of something lurking in the shadows. The second was violent, slamming doors, scratching walls, growling at those who dared approach. But the third was the worst. It was ancient, malevolent, and claimed Lillian as its own. One evening, her best friend Claire visited her house. She found Lillian sitting in her room, eyes rolled back, her lips moving as if in silent prayer. Claire shook her gently, and that's when it happened. Lillian's head snapped forward, her eyes locking onto Claire with unnatural intensity. She smiled, but it wasn't her smile. "She's not here anymore," Lillian said, her voice layered with three others. "We took her." Claire ran, but the nightmares followed her for weeks. Lillian's family sought help, but doctors found nothing physically wrong with her. Therapists suggested schizophrenia, but no medication worked. Meanwhile, the spirits grew stronger. Lillian would convulse violently at night, screaming in voices not her own. Scratches and bruises appeared on her body, as if unseen hands were tormenting her. Then came the writing. One morning, her parents found the walls of her bedroom covered in symbols, ancient, demonic inscriptions no one in the family could understand. She had written them in her own blood. Her father, a skeptic all his life, finally broke. He called a priest. The priest, Father Donovan, had seen possessions before, but nothing like this. The moment he stepped into the house, a guttural laughter erupted from Lillian's room. "You're too late," she hissed as he approached. The exorcism began at midnight. Lillian thrashed, screamed, and convulsed as Father Donovan read the sacred verses. The air turned ice cold, lights flickered, and an unseen force shattered the windows. "She belongs to us." The spirits roared through her. She invited us in. And that was the truth. Lillian had dabbled in something dark, a seance at a graveyard, a foolish game with friends. She had opened a door she couldn't close. The ritual lasted hours. Lillian's body arched unnaturally, her screams inhuman. Finally, as dawn broke, she let out a final, ear-piercing shriek and collapsed. The house fell silent. The spirits were gone, or so they thought. Was it ever over? Lillian's recovery was an illusion. She went through the motions, eating, sleeping, attending therapy, but something inside her had changed. Her eyes, once bright with life, now held a vacant, haunted look. She flinched at shadows, avoided mirrors, and refused to speak about what had happened. But the house knew. The walls creaked at night with whispers too faint to decipher, and the air carried a weight of something unseen. Her parents told themselves it was over. They wanted to believe that, until they saw the reflection. One morning, Lillian's mother found her standing in front of the mirror, staring blankly at her own image. but something was wrong. Her reflection wasn't mimicking her movements. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Her mother stepped closer, heart pounding. Then suddenly Lillian's face twisted into a grin that did not belong to her. Her voice, deeper, layered, whispered, "You thought you could cast us out?" Then the mirror cracked. That night, Lillian's father locked himself in his study, gripping a crucifix. Her mother sat awake in bed, praying. But prayers meant nothing anymore. Lillian roamed the house, her footsteps slow and deliberate. The house itself had changed, colder, darker, as if something unseen lurked in every corner. The air carried the scent of decay, and whispers slithered through the halls. Weeks passed, and the changes grew more terrifying. Lillian no longer ate, she barely slept. And then, one night, she disappeared. Her bed was empty, her window wide open. Her parents searched everywhere, but she was gone without a trace. A week later, they received a call. A girl had been found wandering a deserted road miles away. She was barefoot, covered in scratches, and muttering in 3 voices at once. When they arrived at the hospital, she was sitting on the bed, rocking back and forth. She looked up at them with lifeless eyes and whispered, "You let them in." The doctors insisted it was trauma, dissociation, a breakdown from the ordeal. But her parents knew better. The girl they had brought home was not their daughter. Strange things began happening almost immediately. Objects moved on their own. Cold spots lingered in the air. The family cat refused to enter Lillian's room. One night, her mother awoke to a sound, soft laughter coming from the hallway. She stepped outside and saw Lillian standing in the dark. Her head was tilted unnaturally, and her lips curled into a knowing smile. "They never left," she whispered. "They're inside now, watching, waiting." That was the last time her mother stayed in the house. Desperate, her father contacted the priest who had performed the exorcism. When Father Donovan arrived, he barely recognized Lillian. Her skin was sickly pale, her nails cracked, her hair dull and lifeless, but her eyes weren't hers anymore. "What have you done?" he murmured. Lillian let out a slow, guttural laugh. "You're too late, Father. We never left. We never will." The priest attempted another ritual, but this time the spirits fought back with an unholy fury. The house shook, shadows twisted and contorted into monstrous forms, and Lillian screamed, a blood-curdling, unnatural wail that sent shivers through everyone in the room. Then suddenly, silence. She collapsed. For days, she was unresponsive. Doctors said she was in a catatonic state, but her parents suspected otherwise. They sat by her bedside, praying, waiting, hoping. And then, one evening, her mother heard it. A whisper, "We'll be back." Lillian's eyes snapped open, and she smiled. The house was never the same. Lillian moved away years later, but wherever she went, strange occurrences followed. Unseen hands tugged at blankets, mirrors cracked without reason. And at night, she still heard the whispers. The spirits had claimed her long ago. And no matter how far she ran, no matter how many priests, doctors, or exorcisms she sought out, one truth remained. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed.
Why do evil spirits target teenagers? Teenagers are often the prime targets of malevolent spirits due to their unstable energy, heightened emotions, and psychological vulnerability. Paranormal researchers believe that human bodies emit life force energy, which is at its most unstable during adolescence. Some spirits feed off this energy, seeking weak or unprotected individuals. Psychologically, teenagers are more prone to magical thinking, making them more likely to sense or attract supernatural entities. Dark spirits, especially those tied to obsessive behaviors in life, may continue seeking young victims, feeding on their fear and emotional turmoil. Certain locations also play a role. Houses with violent histories, murders, suicides, or occult rituals can become spiritual hotspots, attracting restless entities looking for new hosts. How to protect yourself. Avoid Ouija boards and rituals. Keep your space bright and clutter-free. Don't give in to fear. Spirits thrive on psychological weakness. If activity escalates, seek spiritual guidance. The line between our world and theirs is thin. Are you sure you're alone?
Throughout history, curses have haunted humanity. From the ancient tombs of Egypt to the haunted castles of Europe, stories of curses have been passed down through generations. These curses are not just tales, they are warnings. Warnings that the world is far darker than we dare to imagine. In ancient Egypt, it was believed that disturbing the resting place of the dead would unleash a curse so powerful it could follow you across lifetimes. The curse of the pharaohs was no myth. It was a reality for those who dared to defy the gods. In medieval Europe, witches were said to cast curses that could destroy entire families. These curses were so feared that even the mention of them could send shivers down the spines of the bravest knights. And today, curses still linger. They hide in forgotten objects, in abandoned houses, and in the shadows of our world. They wait for the right moment to strike, to remind us that the past is never truly buried. Remember, the world is darker than you think, and sometimes the curses of the past are closer than you realize. If you've enjoyed these tales of curses in the unknown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more spine-chilling content. The world is full of mysteries, and we're just scratching the surface. Let us know in the comments, do you believe in curses? And if so, have you ever encountered one?